So for our methodology, we selected 3 samples, 2 of which were polyphonic and 1 was monophonic. We split these up a little bit differently. 2 were anechoic from the anechoic website and 1 was an original composition, Scott specifically, so he could speak on that more if need be. The reverb we selected was Ableton Live's Dark Hall reverb. Then of course we started at 0 milliseconds and worked our way through the 400 millisecond mark, adding 500 milliseconds each time, which totaled 9 iterations. And the second parameter we chose to work with was the pre-delay time. So we all individually selected a decay time. I know mine personally was 3,000 milliseconds. Scott and Drell can speak towards theirs if need be. But we started at 0.5 milliseconds, which is the lowest time that Ableton Live will allow for. And then we iterated through to 250 milliseconds, adding 50 milliseconds each time. And of course, we analyzed and discussed, mainly listening for any sonic differences, specifically the just noticeable difference when we could finally hear the setting being applied, all the way through when it was too much, too heavy, which again isn't not a really defined amount, but just kind of listening for where we thought that sweet spot was and where we thought that actual usable and applicable settings were. So then here is a picture of the Dark Hall reverb setting. This is while we were iterating through the decay time. So for this particular example, you'll notice it's set at 2 seconds. The pre-delayed time was always set to 0.5 milliseconds when we were working with the decay time. And then outside of the dry wet, all of the other settings are stock. That is how they were. That is how they were through the entire thing as well. The dry wet setting we did change down to 50%. We were kind of discussing what a good percentage would be. I know Jarrell noted at one point in time, and he could speak to this more a little bit too, 100% was virtually you couldn't hear anything. It was too wet. And then dry, of course, if we put it all the way down to 0%, was basically nothing, right? It's no point in doing this little study then. So we settled with 50% and made sure that it didn't influence any of our decisions and discussion on the decay time and pre-delay time. So then I think what I'll do here is I'll go ahead and share each piece individually and speak about it individually and then go on. Now, since we did have 9 iterations just for the decay time alone, the only thing I'm going to share with you is the piece as it stands dry. So here is the first polyphonic piano piece. This is Scott's original composition. So as we worked through 0 to 2,500 milliseconds, general consensus, we really couldn't hear any audible differences in the decay time. But then between 3,000 and 4,000 milliseconds, it was very faint, but we could hear that a reverb had been applied. So then we'll go on to this Beethoven piece. This is an ensemble piece with vocals added on top. So Jarrell found the piece on that anechoic site and then added the vocals in, overdubbed them on top here. So we'll give it a listen.
There once was a young rat named Arthur who would never take the trouble to make up his mind. Whenever his friends asked him if he would like to go out with them, he would only answer, "I don't know." He wouldn't say yes, and he wouldn't say no either. He could never learn to make a choice. His Aunt Ellen said to him, "No one will ever care for you if you carry on like this. You have no more mind than a blade of grass." Arthur looked wise, but said nothing.
So for this piece, between 0 and 500 milliseconds, there was really no audible difference with the reverb or the decay time in this case. But between 500 and 4,000 milliseconds, you could definitely begin to hear, and not just begin, but at 500 you could begin, but all the way up through 4,000, you could hear the difference on the vocals. You could really tell that the decay time had been applied and then was being altered as it went through. So then finally, the monophonic piece is a trumpet solo, so we'll give that a go. So then for this piece, similar to the Beethoven piece, between 0 and 500 milliseconds, there was really no audible difference. Then between 500 and 4,000 milliseconds, the audible difference was on the entire track. And again, you could tell that it began at 500 and worked its way all the way through 4,000. So then pre-delay time, that piano track between 0 and 100 milliseconds, or really in this case, 0 related to 0.5. Between 0 and 100 milliseconds, there was really no audible difference. And then between 150 and 250, you could hear it, but then the reverb began to fade. And I know that's kind of a weird comment to make, but you could hear that separation between the original and the reverb applied. And the reverb just kind of morphed into the original again. So you could hear the pre-delay, but the reverb kind of lost its emphasis. That Beethoven piece, very similar, between 0 and 100 milliseconds, no audible difference. But then between 150 and 250 milliseconds, you could hear that the pre-delay time had been adjusted. And then finally, the trumpet kind of varied a little bit. Between 0 and 50 milliseconds, there was no audible difference. The 100 is when we could notice it, and it was noted that this was the best version, because then between 150 and 250, it was overbearing. That separation almost hindered what we were listening to.